She didn't mean to text him, but that night, he became the only one who stayed. The screen lit up Clara Bennett's face in the darkness of her tiny studio apartment, the pale blue glow trembling slightly as her hands refused to steady. Outside, the distant hum of traffic along the freeway was constant, indifferent, like the rest of the world that had kept moving while hers quietly unraveled. The clock on her phone read 12:17 a.m., and she hadn't slept more than 2 hours in the last 3 nights. Not since the overdue notice had slid under her door, not since her bank app showed a balance so low it felt like a mistake. She stared at the message thread, her thumb hovering, hesitating, pride fighting something heavier, something more urgent. In the silence behind her, a soft crackle came through the baby monitor, followed by a faint, restless sigh. Clara's eyes closed for a second, just 1 second, as if she could gather strength from the dark, and then she typed, "James, I'm really sorry. I hate asking again, but I don't have enough for rent this week. I'll pay you back Friday. I promise." The words looked smaller once they were written, more desperate, like they didn't belong to her. She swallowed hard, hit send before she could delete it, and let her phone fall onto the worn couch beside her. The fabric scratched against her skin, familiar and tired, like everything else in that room. She leaned forward, elbows on her knees, pressing her palms into her eyes until colors bloomed behind them. Somewhere in the building, a door slammed. Somewhere else, laughter echoed faintly down the hallway, life continuing, as if she weren't sitting there counting every dollar, every hour, every decision that had led her here. Her phone buzzed. Clara froze. For a second, she didn't move, didn't breathe, as if the sound itself might disappear if she ignored it. Then she reached for it slowly, almost carefully, like it might break. The message on the screen made her stomach drop. "I think you have the wrong number." Her heart sank so fast it felt physical. Heat rushed to her face, embarrassment burning through the exhaustion. She checked the number, blinking hard, and there it was, the last digit off by 1. A stupid mistake, small, careless, and somehow it felt like the final confirmation of everything she'd been afraid of. She couldn't even ask for help correctly. "I'm so sorry," she typed quickly, fingers clumsy now. "Please ignore that. Wrong number." She hit send and immediately locked her phone, tossing it aside like it might judge her. "Of course," she whispered under her breath, shaking her head, a humorless laugh escaping her. She stood up, pacing the narrow space between the couch and the kitchenette, the hardwood floor cool beneath her bare feet. She should have known better. She should have figured it out on her own. She always had to. The monitor crackled again, a soft whimper following this time, and Clara turned instantly, instinct overriding everything else. She crossed the room in 2 quick steps, checking the small crib tucked into the corner, her expression softening the moment she saw the tiny rise and fall of her daughter's chest. "It's okay," she murmured, brushing a strand of hair back from the baby's forehead, her voice barely above a breath. "I've got you." The words were automatic, but tonight they felt heavier, like a promise she wasn't sure how to keep. Her phone buzzed again. Clara frowned, glancing back toward the couch. For a moment, she considered ignoring it. Wrong number, she told herself. Nothing to see. But something, maybe curiosity, maybe the simple need for any kind of connection, pulled her back. She picked it up, unlocking the screen. Another message. "Is your baby going to be okay?" Clara blinked. Her fingers hovered over the glass again, this time not from hesitation but confusion. She hadn't mentioned a baby, not once. The room felt quieter suddenly, like the air had shifted. She read the message again, slower this time. Not intrusive, not demanding, just concerned. Her first instinct was to pull back, to shut it down, to protect what little space she had left. But exhaustion has a way of softening edges, of making even strangers feel like something close to hope. Clara exhaled slowly, her shoulders dropping just a fraction. She typed back, cautious, measured. "We'll manage. Sorry again for the mistake." She stared at the screen, waiting, not sure why she was waiting at all. This wasn't how things worked. Strangers didn't care. People didn't just step into your life because of a typo. And yet, a few seconds later, the reply came. "You don't have to apologize. And you don't have to do it alone tonight." Clara's breath caught, just slightly, just enough for her to notice. She didn't know who he was. She didn't know why he answered. But for the first time that night, the silence didn't feel quite as heavy. Clara stared at the message longer than she should have, her thumb hovering over the keyboard while her mind searched for a reason to ignore it, to protect herself from whatever this was. Because nothing good ever came from strangers stepping in uninvited, especially not at midnight, especially not when she was this tired. She glanced over at the crib again, watching the slow, uneven rise of her daughter's chest, and something inside her softened just enough to type back, "I appreciate that, but you really do not have to stay. It was just a mistake." The three dots appeared almost instantly, like he had been waiting. "I know it was a mistake," the reply came. "But sometimes those are the only honest moments people have." Clara frowned slightly, reading it twice, unsure how to respond to something that felt both simple and unexpectedly thoughtful. She sank back onto the couch, pulling her knees up, the fabric cold against her skin, and for a moment she just held the phone without typing, letting the quiet settle around her. Outside, a car passed, headlights sweeping briefly across the thin curtains, then disappearing. Her phone buzzed again. "Have you slept at all?" Clara let out a small breath that almost turned into a laugh. It was such a normal question, the kind people asked when they cared, and that alone made it feel unfamiliar. "Not really," she admitted, her fingers moving slower now, more deliberate. There was a pause this time before his response, longer than before, and she wondered if he had stepped away, if the moment had passed, if she had imagined the sincerity in his words. Then the message came. "That explains the message. And the way you apologized twice." Clara blinked, surprised, her lips pressing together as if she had been gently called out. "Old habit," she typed back, then hesitated, adding, "I do not like bothering people." Another pause, shorter this time. "You are not bothering me," he wrote. "I am the one who answered." Something about that made her shoulders drop, just a little, tension easing in a way she had not expected. She shifted on the couch, pulling a thin blanket around her as if that might ground her, might make this feel less strange. "You should probably get some sleep," she said, almost reflexively, the part of her that still believed she should not take up space speaking first. "It is late." The reply came slower now, but steadier. "I will. Eventually. But right now, I am here. And it sounds like you could use someone who is." Clara swallowed, her throat tight in a way she could not quite explain. She had not told him anything, not really, and yet it felt like he could see the outline of her night, the weight of it, the quiet panic she had been trying to hold together. She glanced at the baby monitor again, the soft static filling the silence between messages, and typed before she could second-guess it. "It has just been a rough week." The response was immediate this time. "Do you want to talk about it? Or do you just need someone to listen while you figure it out?" Clara stared at the screen, her heart picking up slightly, not from fear, but from the unfamiliar choice in front of her. No pressure, no expectation, just an open door. She leaned her head back against the couch, eyes drifting closed for a second, feeling the exhaustion settle deeper into her bones. "I do not even know where to start," she admitted finally. The reply came softer, almost like a voice lowered in a quiet room. "Start anywhere. Or do not start at all. I am not going anywhere." Clara exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that carried more than air, something unspoken leaving with it. She adjusted the blanket around her shoulders, curling slightly into herself, and for the first time that night, the apartment did not feel quite as small. She looked at the message again, at the simple certainty in those words, and typed back, her fingers no longer trembling. "Okay, then maybe just stay." Clara did not realize she had been holding her breath until she let it go slowly, her grip on the phone loosening as if something inside her had shifted, just enough to make space for this quiet, unexpected connection. The room felt different now, not brighter, not warmer, but less heavy, like the weight pressing down on her chest had eased by a fraction she could finally notice. She adjusted the blanket around her shoulders and glanced again at the crib, listening for any change in her daughter's breathing before typing back. "Her name is Lily," she wrote, the words appearing carefully, like she was placing something fragile into the conversation. There was a brief pause, then his reply came through. "That is a beautiful name." Clara smiled faintly, the expression small and unfamiliar on her tired face. "She is 6 months old." she added, not sure why she was sharing more, only that it felt easier now than it had minutes ago. She has had a rough few days. Teething, I think. Or maybe just everything at once. The three dots appeared again, steady and present. That sounds exhausting, he replied. For both of you. Clara let out a quiet breath, her head leaning back against the couch, eyes drifting toward the ceiling where a faint crack ran from one corner to the other. It is, she admitted, her honesty coming quicker now, less filtered. I keep telling myself I can handle it, but tonight, I just felt like I was falling behind everything at once. Her fingers paused, hovering, then continued. Bills, rent, sleep, all of it. She hesitated before hitting send, a small instinct still telling her she had already said too much, but she let the message go anyway. The reply came slower this time, like he was choosing his words. You are not falling behind, he wrote. You are carrying more than most people ever have to. Clara's throat tightened unexpectedly, the words landing somewhere deeper than she anticipated. She blinked, staring at the screen, reading it again, as if making sure it was really there. No one had said anything like that to her in a long time. Most people just expected her to keep going, to figure it out, to not complain. It does not feel that way, she typed back, her fingers slower now, more deliberate. It feels like I am always one step away from everything collapsing. The silence stretched for a few seconds, filled only by the soft static of the monitor and the distant hum of the city outside. Then his message appeared. Then tonight, you do not have to think about tomorrow. Just get through this hour. I will stay with you for that. Clara closed her eyes briefly, the simplicity of it cutting through the noise in her head. 1 hour. Not next week. Not next month. Just now. She shifted slightly on the couch, pulling the blanket tighter, her body finally beginning to relax into something close to stillness. What about you? She asked after a moment, her curiosity rising gently. Why are you still awake? There was a longer pause this time, long enough for her to wonder if she had crossed a line, if the balance would tip again. Then the response came, measured and calm. Work mostly. It is easier to stay busy than to be alone with your thoughts. Clara tilted her head slightly, considering that, recognizing the truth in it without knowing anything else about him. That sounds familiar, she replied softly. Another pause, then a second message followed quickly after the first. Difference is, I chose it. You did not. Clara stared at that line, her breath catching just slightly, because it was not pity, not assumption, just observation, and somehow that made it more real. She shifted again, tucking her feet beneath her, her voice silent, but her thoughts louder now, less scattered. Maybe, she typed slowly, but I would still choose her. She glanced toward the crib as she sent it, her expression softening again, something steady beneath the exhaustion. His reply came almost immediately. That tells me everything I need to know about you. Clara did not respond right away. She let the words settle, feeling them land somewhere warm, somewhere steady. The minutes passed quietly, the kind of quiet that no longer felt empty. Her breathing slowed, her shoulders relaxed, and for the first time that night, she did not feel like she was facing it alone. She looked at the screen again, at the message still there, and typed one more line, simple and unguarded. Thank you for staying. Clara held the phone a little closer after sending the message, as if the warmth of the words could somehow stay in her hands, her eyes lingering on the screen while the quiet stretched gently around her. The reply did not come immediately this time, and for a moment she wondered if she had said something too much, if gratitude was where the line was, if this fragile connection might fade just as quietly as it had appeared. But then the screen lit again. You do not have to thank me, he wrote. I made a choice to stay. Clara read it slowly, her fingers resting still against the edge of the phone, absorbing the weight of something so simple, something she had not felt in a long time. Someone choosing, not obligated, not expected, just choosing. She shifted slightly on the couch, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear, her voice softer now even in text. Most people do not, she admitted, then paused before adding, stay. The reply came after a few seconds, steady as before. Most people do not know how. Clara's lips pressed together faintly, her gaze drifting toward the ceiling again as she considered that. It did not feel like an excuse, just a quiet truth. Her phone buzzed again before she could respond. Tell me something, he continued. What made tonight harder than the others? Clara hesitated, her thumb hovering, because the answer was not just one thing. It was everything layered together, small cracks that had finally spread too far. She looked toward the crib again, the faint outline of Lily barely visible in the dim light, and something inside her shifted. I got a notice today, she typed slowly, each word deliberate. Rent is late. Again. She paused, swallowing, then continued. I thought I could catch up this week, but hours got cut at work. And daycare raised their rates last month. I have been trying to balance it, but she stopped there, her fingers freezing as if finishing the sentence would make it too real. She hit send anyway. The response came. Slower this time, as if he was reading every word carefully. That is a lot for one person to carry, he replied, and then another message followed almost immediately, especially on no sleep. Clara let out a small breath, something between relief and exhaustion. She leaned her head back, closing her eyes for a second, letting his words settle in the space where her own thoughts had been too loud before. I keep telling myself it is temporary, she wrote, opening her eyes again. That once I catch up, everything will be okay. But it feels like every time I get close, something else happens. Her phone remained quiet for a moment, the silence stretching just long enough for doubt to creep back in. That familiar voice telling her she should not have shared this much, that strangers did not need to know her problems. Then his message appeared again. That does not mean you are failing, he wrote. It means the system you are trying to survive in is not built for someone carrying as much as you are. Clara blinked, her brows knitting slightly as she read it again, the words landing differently than anything she had told herself before. It was not blame, not pity, just perspective. She shifted on the couch, sitting a little straighter now, her breathing slower, steadier. I have not thought about it like that, she admitted quietly. Another message came through. Most people do not, he said. They just blame themselves. Clara felt something loosen in her chest, a tension she had not realized she had been holding for months. She glanced again at Lily, then back at the phone, her fingers moving before she could overthink it. Can I ask you something? The reply came quickly. Of course. Clara hesitated for a second, her heart picking up slightly, not from fear, but from the unfamiliar ease of asking. Why did you really answer? She typed, her question simple but heavy with everything she had not said. The silence that followed felt different this time, not empty, but thoughtful, like he was choosing how much to reveal. Seconds passed, then his message appeared. Because you sounded like someone who needed an answer. He wrote, then after a pause, and I know what. It feels like when no one responds. Clara stared at the screen, her breath catching just slightly, because there it was, not just kindness, but something shared, something unspoken between two people who had both known silence in different ways. She adjusted the blanket around her again, curling slightly into it, her voice softer now than it had been all night. I am glad you did, she typed, the words simple. But this time they did not feel small. They felt real. Clara stayed still for a long moment after sending the message, her eyes fixed on the screen as if the words might disappear if she looked away, the quiet in the apartment settling deeper around her, softer now, less suffocating than before. The baby monitor gave a faint static hum, steady and rhythmic, and she found herself matching her breathing to it without realizing. Her phone buzzed again. I am glad I did too, he replied, and something in the simplicity of that answer made her chest tighten in a way that felt unfamiliar, not heavy, but full. She shifted slightly, pulling the blanket higher over her shoulders, her fingers brushing absently against the worn fabric as she thought about how easily this conversation had unfolded, how quickly a stranger had become the one steady presence in a night that had felt like it was falling apart. She hesitated before typing again, her instincts still cautious even as her trust quietly grew. You said you chose to stay, she wrote slowly, but you do not know anything about me. The reply came after a short pause, thoughtful, measured. I know enough, he wrote. I know you apologized before you even asked for help, and I know you checked on your baby before you answered me, and I know you are still awake trying to hold everything together when you should be resting. Clara blinked, her breath catching slightly as she read the message again, the accuracy of it disarming in a way she had not expected. She had not said those things directly, But somehow he had seen them anyway. She leaned back against the couch, her head resting against the wall behind it, her eyes drifting closed for a second as she let the words settle. That does not mean you should stay up all night, she typed back after a moment, her voice softer now, less guarded. You have your own life. The response came almost immediately this time. I do, he admitted. And right now, this is part of it. Clara stared at the screen, the words simple but firm, and something about them made her heart feel steadier, like the ground beneath her had stopped shifting just long enough for her to stand. She shifted her legs beneath her, tucking them closer, her body finally beginning to relax into the couch. I do not want you to feel like you have to fix anything, she added, her fingers slowing as she chose each word carefully. I am not looking for money or anything like that. The three dots appeared, disappeared, then appeared again, as if he was considering how to respond. When the message came, it was slower, deliberate. I am not trying to fix you, he wrote, and I am not trying to buy anything. Clara exhaled quietly, tension she had not realized she was holding releasing from her shoulders. Another message followed. I am just making sure you are not alone in this moment. Her eyes softened as she read it, her grip on the phone loosening slightly. She glanced toward the crib again, the outline of Lily peaceful now, and then back at the screen. That is more than most people offer, she admitted. The reply came gently. It should not be rare, but it is. Clara felt a faint ache in her chest at that, not painful, just honest. She shifted again, pulling the blanket tighter as the cool air brushed against her arms. I am not used to this, she said, her honesty coming easier now, less filtered. Talking like this with someone I do not know. There was a brief pause before his response, like he understood the weight behind her words. Then we can take it slow, he replied. No expectations, no pressure. Just a conversation. Clara nodded faintly to herself, even though he could not see it, her breathing evening out as the minutes passed. The clock on her phone now read 12:54 a.m., time slipping by without the usual panic attached to it. She realized she had not checked the time in nearly 20 minutes, and that alone felt like something had shifted. Okay. She typed softly, her fingers steady now. She hesitated, then added, Can I know your name? The silence that followed was different this time, not uncertain, but intentional, like a door about to open just a little wider. A few seconds passed, then the screen lit up again. Adrian, he wrote. Clara read the name quietly, repeating it once in her mind, letting it settle into the space where he had already begun to exist. She smiled faintly, a small, tired but genuine expression. I am Clara, she replied. Even though he had not asked, the response came almost instantly. I know, he said simply, and for a moment, Clara frowned slightly in confusion, her mind catching on that single word, wondering how he could possibly know her name when she had never said it. Her eyes dropped back to the message, reading it again, slower this time, and a subtle unease mixed with curiosity began to form beneath the calm she had just found. Clara's fingers froze above the screen, her breath catching just slightly as she read the message again, slower this time, as if the meaning might change if she gave it another second. I know. The words sat there, simple, calm, and yet they shifted something inside her, a ripple of uncertainty threading through the quiet she had just begun to trust. She straightened slightly on the couch, the blanket slipping a little from her shoulder as her focus sharpened. Her mind moved quickly now, retracing everything she had said, every detail she had shared, searching for the moment she might have given her name without realizing it. But she had not. She was sure of that. Her thumb hovered. Before she typed back, more cautious now, her tone careful but steady. How do you know my name? The message sent, and for the first time since this conversation began, the silence that followed felt heavier, not empty, but filled with questions. The seconds stretched longer than before, each one pulling her attention tighter toward the screen. The baby monitor crackled softly in the background, Lily shifting slightly in her sleep, and Clara instinctively glanced over, grounding herself in something real before looking back at the phone. Finally, it buzzed. I should have explained that sooner, Adrian replied, the words appearing one by one, measured. Clara felt her chest tighten slightly, not fear, but awareness, like stepping into a space she had not expected. Another message followed. Your message was meant for someone named James, he continued. And the number you texted is 1 digit off from someone who works for me. Clara blinked, her brows drawing together as she tried to follow, the connection forming slowly in her mind. He is in my human resources department, Adrian added. Same last name you used in your message. Clara's breath slowed as the pieces began to settle into place, the explanation logical, grounded, and yet still surprising. She leaned back again, tension easing just slightly from her shoulders. So you asked him about me? She typed, her tone more curious now than guarded. There was a pause before his reply, not long, but enough to feel deliberate. Only after you said you sent the message by mistake, he wrote. I wanted to make sure you were not in some kind of immediate danger. Clara exhaled quietly, the concern in his words softening the edge of her unease. It was not intrusion for the sake of curiosity, but something closer to responsibility, to care expressed in a way she was not used to. She shifted the blanket back over her shoulder, settling into it again. And he told you my name? She asked. The response came steadily. He recognized the situation immediately, Adrian said. He mentioned you were his sister, and that you have been going through a difficult time lately. Clara's eyes softened slightly at that, a mix of surprise and something quieter, something like relief. James had always worried about her more than he said out loud. She had not realized how much he might have shared. She leaned her head back again, her gaze drifting toward the ceiling as she processed it all. That makes sense, she admitted after a moment, her fingers moving more slowly now, but no longer tense. He worries too much. Adrian's reply came with a hint of warmth she could almost hear through the screen. From what I know now, he probably has a reason to. Clara let out a small breath that almost turned into a laugh, the sound soft and brief, but real. She glanced again toward Lily, reassured by the steady quiet from the monitor, then back at the phone. I hope you did not think I was trying to. I do not know. Ask for something from you. She typed, a trace of that earlier hesitation returning. The response came quickly, firm but gentle. I did not, Adrian replied. And even if you had been asking for help, there is nothing wrong with that. Clara stared at the words, something in them settling deeper than she expected, undoing a belief she had carried quietly for too long. She shifted again, pulling her legs closer beneath her, the couch no longer feeling like a place she had collapsed onto, but somewhere she could rest. The clock on her phone read 1:12 a.m. now, time moving forward without the pressure it had carried earlier. She looked at Adrian's name on the screen, the conversation stretching behind it, and realized something had changed without her noticing exactly when. She was no longer just responding. She was staying too. Her fingers moved again, slower, more certain. Thank you for explaining, she wrote, then paused before adding, and for still being here after that. The reply came without delay. I told you, Adrian said simply. I am not going anywhere tonight. Clara held the phone a little tighter, her breathing steady, the quiet around her no longer empty but shared, and for the first time in a long while, the night did not feel like something she had to survive alone. Clara did not realize how much her body had relaxed until she shifted slightly and felt the tension no longer sitting heavy in her shoulders, her grip on the phone loose now instead of tight, her breathing steady in a way it had not been earlier that night. The quiet between messages no longer felt like something to fear, but something she could sit inside without rushing to fill. She glanced at the clock again, 1:26 a.m., and for the first time in weeks, the late hour did not feel like a countdown toward another exhausted morning, but simply a moment she was moving through. Her phone buzzed softly in her hand. Are you still there? Adrian asked. Clara smiled faintly, the expression small but real, her fingers moving easily across the screen. Yes, she replied, then added after a second. I am just not used to things being this quiet without it feeling heavy. The response came quickly, steady as always. Quiet can feel different when you are not carrying it alone. Clara read the line twice, her chest tightening slightly in a way that was not painful, just full, like something inside her was slowly being acknowledged after too long. She shifted her legs beneath her, tucking them closer, her body settling deeper into the couch. I think I forgot what that feels like, she admitted, her honesty coming without hesitation now. The reply came softer this time, almost like it had been written with care. Then we can remind you. Clara let out a slow breath, her eyes drifting toward the baby monitor again, watching the small, steady movement that grounded everything. For a moment, she said nothing, just sat with that idea, letting it settle. Then her phone buzzed again. "Can I ask you something else?" Adrian wrote. Clara hesitated only briefly before answering. "You already did once," she replied, a faint hint of warmth in her tone. "So I guess that means yes." There was a slight pause, then the message appeared. "When was the last time someone helped you without expecting something in return?" Clara's fingers stilled, her expression shifting slightly as she read the question, her mind searching through memories that felt farther away than they should have. She leaned her head back against the couch, her eyes unfocused for a moment as she tried to find an answer that did not feel forced. "I do not remember," she typed finally, the words simple but heavy with truth. She stared at the screen after sending it, her chest tightening again, not from the question itself, but from the realization behind her answer. The response came slower this time, deliberate. "Then tonight counts," Adrian wrote. Clara blinked, her throat tightening unexpectedly as she read it, because it was not dramatic, not exaggerated, just stated like a quiet fact. She shifted slightly, pulling the blanket closer again, her fingers curling into the fabric as if to hold on to the moment. "You make it sound simple," she said, her words softer now. His reply followed. "It is simple," he wrote. "People just make it complicated." Clara let out a small breath, her gaze drifting again toward Lily, the steady rhythm of her daughter's sleep filling the room with something calm and real. For a moment, she did not respond, just sat there, letting the quiet stretch, letting the presence on the other end of the phone remain without needing to fill every second. Then the baby monitor crackled, a soft, restless sound breaking the stillness. Clara straightened immediately, her attention shifting fully. She stood from the couch, the blanket slipping from her shoulders as she moved quickly but carefully toward the crib. She reached down, gently brushing her fingers against Lily's back, whispering something soft and soothing under her breath until the small movements settled again. She stayed there for a moment longer, watching, making sure the rhythm returned to normal, before stepping back. When she returned to the couch, she picked up her phone again, her fingers moving with a quiet steadiness. "She woke up for a second," she typed, "but she is okay." The reply came almost instantly. "You moved before you even thought about it," Adrian said. Clara paused, reading the message with a faint crease in her brow. "What do you mean?" she asked. The response followed. "You did not hesitate," he wrote. "You just went to her. That says more than anything you could explain." Clara looked down at the phone, her expression softening again, something warm settling beneath the exhaustion. She sat back down, pulling the blanket over her shoulders once more, her body easing into the familiar space. "She is the only thing I do not second guess," she admitted quietly. The reply came with the same steady calm she had come to expect. "That is because she is the reason you keep going." Clara held the phone a little tighter, her breathing slow and even, her eyes lingering on the screen. For a moment, she did not type anything back, because she did not need to. The truth in his words filled the silence in a way that felt complete, and as the night continued to move forward, she realized she was no longer counting the hours until morning. She was simply staying, just like he was. The quiet stretched longer this time, not empty, not fragile, but settled, like the night itself had decided to slow down around them. And Clara found herself no longer watching the clock, no longer counting minutes, just sitting there with her phone resting lightly in her hand, her breathing steady, her thoughts no longer racing ahead of her. She glanced once more toward the crib, the faint outline of Lily peaceful and still, and something inside her softened even further, a calm she had not expected to find at nearly 2 in the morning. Her phone buzzed gently, pulling her attention back. "Are you getting tired?" Adrian asked. Clara tilted her head slightly, considering the question, because the exhaustion was still there, woven deep into her body, but it felt different now, less overwhelming, more like something she could finally rest into instead of fight against. "A little," she admitted, her fingers moving slowly, "but not the kind that feels impossible anymore." The response came almost immediately. "That is a good sign," he wrote. "It means your mind is finally letting go." Clara read the words and let out a quiet breath, her shoulders easing as she sank a little deeper into the couch. The blanket wrapped around her like something steady and familiar. I think it helped, not thinking about everything all at once, she added after a moment. Adrian's reply followed, calm and certain. You were never meant to carry it all at once. Clara's eyes lingered on that sentence, something about it settling into her in a way that felt lasting, like a truth she had been too tired to see before. She adjusted her position slightly, curling into the corner of the couch, her voice softer now, slower. What happens when morning comes? She asked, the question quiet but real, the kind that had been waiting beneath everything else. There was a pause this time, longer than usual, as if Adrian was considering not just the answer, but how to say it. Then the message appeared. Morning will still be there, he wrote, but you will not be the same version of yourself who was trying to survive tonight. Clara blinked, her breath catching just slightly, because it was not a promise that everything would be fixed, just a reminder that something inside her had already begun to shift. She looked down at her hands, at the way they were no longer trembling, at the quiet stillness she had found without even noticing when it started. I hope so, she typed softly. The reply came with a quiet certainty. You stayed, Adrian wrote. That already changes things. Clara felt that settle in her chest, a small but steady weight, grounding instead of heavy. She leaned her head back, her eyes drifting closed for a moment as she let the silence fill in around the words, not empty, but shared. Her phone buzzed again. Do you have to work tomorrow? He asked. Clara opened her eyes slowly, focusing on the screen again. Yes, she replied. Morning shift. 8 a.m. She glanced at the clock, now reading 2:03 a.m., and let out a small breath. I should probably try to sleep soon. The response came gently, without pressure. You should, Adrian said. Even a few hours will help. Clara nodded slightly, even though he could not see it, her body already beginning to lean into the idea of rest. She shifted, placing the phone beside her for a second as she adjusted the blanket and tucked it more securely around her shoulders, then picked it up again. She hesitated before typing, her fingers pausing as if the next words mattered more than the others. Will you still be here when I wake up? She asked. The question simple, but carrying something deeper beneath it. The reply came without delay. Yes, Adrian wrote. I will be here. Clara felt something steady settle in her chest at that. Not a rush, not overwhelming, just quiet assurance. She let out a slow breath, her eyes softening as she looked at the screen. Okay, she typed, the word small but certain. She placed the phone gently on the couch beside her, within reach, not wanting to lose that connection entirely, but finally allowing herself to lean back fully, her head resting against the cushion. The apartment remained quiet, the same walls, the same dim light, but it no longer felt like a place she was trapped in, just somewhere she could rest for a while. Her eyes drifted closed again, her breathing slow and even, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Clara allowed herself to stop holding everything together, even if just for a few hours, because somewhere on the other end of a mistaken message, someone had chosen to stay, and that was enough to let her finally fall asleep. The soft gray light of early morning slipped quietly through the thin curtains, stretching across the floor and slowly climbing the edge of the couch, where Clara lay curled beneath the blanket, her breathing steady, deeper than it had been in days. For a moment, she did not move, suspended in that rare space between sleep and waking where nothing rushed her, nothing demanded anything from her yet. Then the faint sound from the baby monitor broke through. A small stirring, a soft whimper, and instinct pulled her fully back. Her eyes opened immediately, clearer than she expected, her body responding without hesitation as she pushed herself up and crossed the short distance to the crib. Hey, sweetheart, she whispered gently, her voice soft and warm as she reached down, brushing her hand along Lily's back, the familiar rhythm returning as the baby settled again. Clara stayed there for a few seconds longer than necessary, just watching, grounding herself in the quiet rise and fall. Before stepping back, the apartment looked the same worn couch, the same dim corners, but something about it felt different, lighter in a way she could not quite name. She turned slowly, her eyes landing on the phone resting where she had left it, and a small flicker of memory returned all at once. She walked back, picking it up carefully, almost cautiously, as if unsure whether the night had been real or just something her exhausted mind had created. The screen lit up instantly. And there it was, the conversation, every message exactly where she had left it, the quiet proof that it had all actually happened. Her heart lifted slightly, a small but steady warmth spreading through her chest. There was a new message waiting. "Good morning, Clara." She blinked, her lips parting, slightly in surprise, the simplicity of it landing deeper than she expected. She checked the time, 6:42 a.m., and realized he had been awake before she was, just like he said. Her fingers moved slowly, still waking, but steady. "Good morning," she replied, then hesitated before adding, "You stayed." The response came almost immediately, as if he had been watching the screen. "I told you I would." Clara exhaled softly, a small smile forming without effort this time, the kind that reached her eyes even through the lingering tiredness. She sat back down on the couch, pulling the blanket loosely around her shoulders again, though the chill in the room felt less sharp now. "I slept," she typed, the words simple, but meaningful in a way she could feel. "A few hours, but it felt like more." The reply followed. "That matters," Adrian wrote. "More than you think." Clara glanced toward Lily again, reassured by the quiet, then back at the screen. "I feel different," she admitted slowly, searching for the right word. "Not like everything is fixed, but not as overwhelmed." There was a short pause before his response. "That is because you gave yourself a moment to breathe," he said, "and you let someone stay when you needed it." Clara read the message carefully, letting it settle, her fingers resting lightly against the phone. She thought about the night before, about how close she had been to breaking under everything at once, and how a single response had shifted the entire direction of it. "Thank you," she typed again, this time without hesitation, without shrinking the words. Adrian's reply came softer, but just as steady. "You do not have to thank me for choosing to care." Clara's breath caught slightly at that, something in the phrasing settling deeper than anything else he had said. Choosing to care, not obligation, not accident, just choice. She leaned back against the couch, her gaze drifting briefly toward the window where the morning light had grown stronger, filling the room in a way the night never could. "What happens now?" she asked quietly, her question no longer filled with fear, but curiosity. The response took a moment, not long, but thoughtful. "Now," Adrian wrote, "you go to work, you take care of Lily, and you keep going, just like you always have." Clara smiled faintly at that, the familiarity of it grounding instead of overwhelming. Another message followed. "The difference is," he added, "you know you are not invisible anymore." Clara stared at the screen, her chest tightening slightly, but not in the way it had before. This time it felt like something steady, something real. She glanced again at the conversation, at the first message she had sent by mistake, at how small it had seemed in that moment, and how everything after it had unfolded into something she could not have planned. She looked back at Adrian's name on the screen, her fingers moving slowly, but with certainty. "I think I needed someone to answer," she wrote, echoing his words from the night before. The reply came gently, almost immediately. "And I think you found the right person to answer it." Clara let out a soft breath, her eyes lifting toward the morning light once more, the quiet of the apartment no longer heavy, but full of something she could carry with her. She set the phone down beside her, not as something she needed to hold on to, but something she knew would still be there. And as she stood to begin the day, she realized that sometimes the smallest mistake did not ruin anything at all. Sometimes it simply led you to the one person who chose not to look away.